Hey there, it's Captain Cumin, and I'm back for another episode of Mortified. Maybe if I do that long enough, it'll be the clip image. So, just a quick little recap. There is this website called getmortified.com, and it talks about all these readings that go on where people bring in their old poetry and journals and stories and are mortified with embarrassment telling them because they're so awful. And I thought that I would introduce you to the first book I ever wrote, which is called Leonadia. And yes, my name is Daniel. Daniel backwards is Leonad. I thought it was so clever. By the way, the main character's name is Flay, which is elf backwards. Prologue. In the country of Leonadia, in a cave on the Kyre mountain range, a sword fight had emerged between two warriors. One was a tall elf, about the age of 13 in human years, although much older in elven years. The other was a tall, powerful necromancer who is uncommonly strong and believed to be immortal. His race is unknown. The elf's sword was blue, long and thin. He made quick, powerful strikes against the evil warrior, but the warrior was much stronger than he was and slowly getting the upper hand in the fight. After a powerful strike, the elf's sword flew out of his hand and clattered on the cave floor. Taking this chance, the warrior kicked the elf into the cave wall, rocks jutting into his back. The elf was now next to his sword, so he grabbed it and tried to ward off the blow, but the warrior's sword went right through him and into the cave wall several inches. That's a very important detail. "Give me the sword," the warrior said. "Never," the elf responded weakly, glancing at his sword. He noticed the magic running up and down the blade, magic for banishing evil. "Then die," the warrior yelled, pulling another sword out from under his black cloak. The sword was red, a twin sword to the elf's sword. The sword also had magic in it, but this sword was created for destroying. Before the warrior could strike, the elf lifted his hand and yelled, "Dadal!" The ice came from his hand, draining most of his energy and wrapped around the warrior's sword and his arm. The elf had just used magic, which is only known by few and very dangerous, for it took from the body's energy. The elf didn't have the energy to fight anymore, but he had enough energy to say one thing. "If I die with the sword in my hand, my skeleton will never release it because of a magical ward placed on it by my father. Your victory will be an empty one." And with that, the elf lowered his head, having no more energy left. The pain from the sword was still very sharp, but not as sharp as before. "It is impossible for me to kill an elf, young Flay. The structure of my race does not allow it. But I will have my shade possess you and make you release the sword, and leave you here pinned to the wall until you die. Then, with the power of 2 of the 5 great swords, I, Kong Terion, and the Wolf-Tooth clan will rule Leonadia." As he said this, a ghastly creature rose up out of the ground. This was a shade. Shades were very weak and could not attack, but they could possess other living things under the right conditions. As the shade got ready to possess Flay, a horn sounded down the mountain. As Kong Terion looked over the edge of the cave, a look of anger appeared on his face. "The paladins of Clausonus, how did they track me? We will meet again, Flay. Come, Shade." With that, Kong Terion whistled, and a black dragon flew to the cave. Kong Terion got on and began to fly away. As he flew, he yelled one last thing. "You have not seen the last of Kong Terion!" End of prologue. Now we have Chapter 1. As I woke up, pain seared through me. When I looked down, I saw that Kong Terion's sword was still sticking through me. With very much difficulty, I got the sword out of the cave wall. Important, right? And finally, out of me. I winced from I winced from pulling a sword out of myself. I stood up with much difficulty and quickly sat back down. Looking at my left hand, I sighed with relief as I realized that the sword was still there. I hadn't really noticed up until this point that it was. A few hours later, I got up and stumbled to the cave's edge. A few minutes passed, and I figured that my best chance for survival would be the nearby Lom village. Having the injury from the sword would slow me down quite a bit. Not to mention the pain, which I winced from earlier. If I didn't make it within a day, I would surely die. The path to the base of the mountain looked easy enough, with plenty of rest stops along the way. I feared I would run into mountain ogres. I might be able to hold off one, but that would take up most of my energy, and two could easily overwhelm me. Also, the space between here and Lom Village is mostly barren with only a few trees and rocks, making me an easy target. After I figured out the safest route, I sheathed my sword and started down the mountain. About every 5 minutes I had to stop and rest, the pain still sharp. Several times I considered a healing spell, but it would take too much energy. At the third rest stop, I heard something from behind the boulder I was leaning against. A large ogre appeared from behind the boulder. Immediately I was on my feet, sword in my hand. With the inhuman speed of an elf, I struck the ogre on the neck. The blade did nothing as it hit. The blade was forged only to destroy evil. Behind the ogre, I noticed smaller ogres, obviously its children. It was just protecting its children. I took a step back, went on one knee, and laid my sword on the ground. This is a sign of respect, and the ogre understood, although I guess he wasn't provoked by Flay hitting him on the neck. Going back to its children. Striking the ogre had taken most of my energy, and collapsed. A short time later, I heard an angry yelling. Getting up with difficulty, I peered over at the ogre. He was fighting off two wolves with a club. When he struck at one, it would dodge and the other one would attack. I noticed a rock by my feet, so I picked it up and threw it at one wolf. The wolf glared at me angrily and attacked me instead, giving the ogre a chance to kill the other one. The wolf leapt at me and I dove and struck it through the middle, the sword slicing through it like it was water. That took up the rest of my energy, and I blacked out. When I woke up, the ogre was cooking something over a fire. The ogre noticed I was awake and said something I didn't understand. It offered me some dried meat, obviously from the wolf. I quickly ate it, not having eaten for quite a while. After eating, I got up and left. It was almost nighttime, the most dangerous time of the day in Leonadia. During this time, dead creatures roamed the plains looking for flesh to feed on, but if I do not make it to Lom Village soon, I will die. The only way to survive would be to cross the plains overnight. As soon as I got to the base of the mountain, the sun had disappeared behind the horizon. A few hours later, with the pain still sharp, I sat down. My throat was very dry, so I drank from the dew on the leaves. It was almost light out. Everything around me was silent until I heard a loud crack, all caps. Systematically, I jumped up and reached for my sword. The only thing clumsy enough to make that loud of a noise would have to be a zombie. Zombies can only do what their necromancers tell them to do, no matter what. Even if I cut off one arm with my sword, it would grab me with the other. Zombies never give up. Instead of fighting, I ran with the inhuman speed of an elf. After a very short time, I became too tired to run, but I used every bit of energy I had to run faster, until I tripped on a root and fell. My foot was stuck in it. By the time I got my foot out, the zombie was standing over me. There was no energy left in me. I had used it all to run. Just as the zombie reached its hand out to grab me, the top of the sun appeared in the east. The zombie gazed at the sun with a look of fear on its face and disintegrated into nothing. I did not know that zombies did that. Well, later, when the sun was almost halfway into the sky, I managed to get up, but I had to use my sword as a walking stick. I began to walk, the hot sun beating down on me. The injury was not healing well, and hurt more than when it was fresh. My legs felt like they were going to fall off, and I was sure I was going to die before I made it to Lom Village. But when I looked up, I was at the entrance. I used what was left of my energy to do a spell that made my ears look rounded like a human's, not pointed like an elf. A girl about my age in human years walked by and noticed me and ran over, noticing my injuries. "Are you okay? Don't worry, my father's a healer. He can help you," she said. I managed to look up at her. She was the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. Her hair was brownish black. That's the only detail I gave. I smiled at her and then went unconscious. Alright, I'm going to end that episode of Mortified here. Maybe I'll read some more Leonadia. It gets pretty intense after that. Yeah, so leave a like if you enjoyed. It helps me out a lot. And comment below with some of your odder lines from fiction. I seem to prefer the inhuman speed of an elf. That's, yeah. And remember, do not get stabbed through the chest because it will make you wince in pain. Alright, this is Captain Cumin, signing off.
A rolling stone!